Have you ever sat down and thought, how can I write better stories? What did I just write? That was garbage. I have too. And we're going to look at some concepts that will hopefully help us to grow as writers and storytellers and move forward. Welcome to Reimagine Entertainment with Josiah Wright, the podcast dedicated to empowering aspiring artists and creatives on their journey to growth and success. I'm your host, Josiah Wright, and I'm thrilled that you're joining me on this adventure. Let's dive in.
Can I have some more tea?
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the power of storytelling. I know that we talked about storytelling in a previous episode, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper into this concept of storytelling. We've all had stories that just impact us, that last with us for years and years, that we just can't shake. For me, I remember reading the Harry Potter books as a teenager and not being able to put down the book and flipping from page to page. I was just so sucked into the story. And, there's been so many stories like that, whether it's a television show or a movie or a book. Stories are so important and they can stick with us for years and years and years. And I really think that part of the reason why this is because of characters that we relate to. I was watching a video that was looking at the study of the human mind and storytelling and how our mind releases endorphins very similar to like when we're falling in love, when we're engaged in a story. And it's because we connect to characters, we connect to people, and that's what we were made to do as human beings. And so we remember those characters that we connected to. We remember the captivating settings that just opened our imagination because all of a sudden, we're in a whole new world. Storylines that are super engaging because, we can't wait to see how the next twist or turn is going to happen and how things are going to turn out. And especially with film and TV shows, the music and how the musical performance enhances the storytelling. And all of this has affected me very deeply. As I said, I've been touched by engaging stories, and I really do believe that God's called me to do my part in bringing stories to life for the world to enjoy. And not just that, but being able to tell stories that bring life to others. Now, am I just talking about, cheesy feel-good stuff? No, maybe a little bit, I don't know, but I really believe in stories that engage with us, that speak to us, that we relate to. And I think that good stories make us better. I'm one of those people that loves to look at something and listen to something or watch something and to pull it apart and see what makes it tick. That's what I love doing. So whether it's a song or a movie or whatever, I'm looking at how all of the different elements work together to create something that sticks with me. And so this has really shaped my perspective as far as how I look at life and how I enjoy things. And so it's made a big difference in my life, and I believe it makes a big difference in others as well. And also my grandmother, she was a writer. She's passed on now, but she was a writer and she loved books. I remember sitting down and reading books with her as a little kid. And I've always been fascinated with the idea of storytelling, with being able to create a new world or new characters and to be able to tell something that matters to people. As someone that loves to create and as someone that wants to be a part of telling stories, I want to learn everything that I can about crafting stories. What makes a story interesting? How can you write compelling characters? How do writers make their characters so relatable even though they come from different walks of life? So for a little bit here, I want to talk about unraveling the elements of a compelling narrative. So first of all, what is a narrative? Well, a narrative is a form of communication that tells a story or conveys a sequence of events or experiences. It's a way of structuring and presenting information in a coherent and meaningful way, often with the purpose of entertaining, informing, or inspiring the audience. At its core, a narrative typically includes elements such as characters, settings, plot, conflict, and resolution. It may involve a protagonist or multiple characters who go through a series of challenges, obstacles, or transformations. Narratives can be found in various forms, including books, films, TV shows, plays, oral storytelling, and even in everyday conversations. Narratives have the power to evoke emotions, provoke thought, and create a connection between the storyteller or creator and the audience. So when it comes down to it, a narrative is really just about how we present a story. It's the framework that the story exists in. And so I really wanted to kind of dive into some things that I've learned about how to create compelling stories. One of the number one things that I heard from other creators, writers, filmmakers is to stay creative. Now, this is something I kind of understand. Staying creative is not always easy for everybody. It's not always easy for me. There's this feeling that we have where we don't feel like we can create anything. A lot of people call it writer's block. But keeping creative is so important. And there are some practical things that we can do to do that. Number one, it's a muscle. Creativity is a muscle. It's not something that just happens to us. It's not we get struck with lightning and then all of a sudden, bah! No, we got to keep ourselves inspired. I love the example of Stephen King because the dude sits down and writes a certain number of words every single day. And you got to know, there are probably days that he doesn't want to sit down and write, but you know what? He does it anyway. Now, are there lots of other writers and creators that don't do that every single day and they're awesome and amazing? Yeah, there are. But my point is, creativity is a skill that can be developed. You know, I just got through a year-long music mastermind, learning how to write music, release it, which, by the way, my first single's coming out on May 5th. But one of my mentors always told me, do the reps when it comes to creativity. Take 15 minutes every single day and write. And I'm going to tell you guys the exact same thing. You got to sit down. You got to do the work. Another thing my mentor used to say is success is not spelled R-I-S-K. It's spelled W-O-R-K. With creativity, we got to keep ourselves inspired. We got to stay creative. We got to keep pulling from ideas. We have to keep putting ideas into our head. But if we don't take the time every single day to work that muscle, it's going to atrophy. Okay, another really important part of an engaging narrative is characters. Characters are the vehicle in which our story takes place. They are really what pushes the narrative forward. And let me tell you, creating characters is not just giving them a name, giving them a backstory. That's definitely part of it. But we want to develop characters that are relatable. And so we should know our characters. Now, everybody has their own style. And yeah, you can create characters that are less deep than others, and that's fine. But we want characters that relate to our audience. We want them to be able to grow and transform and change and become more than they were at the beginning of the story. We want them to have desires and conflicts and flaws that people can relate to and that make the character seem believable. And not only that, but we want these characters to emotionally connect with our audience. If there ain't no connection, people are going to disconnect. And we don't want that. We want people to connect with what we're making. So, characters. Don't just write down a bunch of names and try to make it up as you go. Make characters that you can bond with and then have them tell the story. Another thing that I saw a lot of people talking about was conflict and resolution. Let me tell you, no story is good if it's just happy, good all the time. Maybe I'm wrong. If you can write something that is engaging, that's just awesome, everything's good all the time for my characters, then I want to see it. But the reality is conflict drives the plot. It keeps the audience connected and engaged with the story. It's the challenges and the tensions and the problems that characters have to overcome that make it interesting because it means the character has to change. And these don't have to be external struggles. They can be internal struggles. It can be problems between people. It can be problems with external forces. Conflict adds depth and excitement to the story. Listen, y'all, nobody likes to read or watch characters that never have to go through anything hard. It makes them seem inhuman, and nobody likes characters like that. And so conflicts and then resolution is so important because the character has to meet a problem and then resolve it. Another thing that should not be overlooked is a well-structured plot. The plot is the storyline, right? It's what drives the story through and tells us this is what happens at the beginning, this is what happens in the middle, and this is what happens at the end. We want to establish a strong setup when we're introducing our world and our characters. We also want to have a strong setup when we're introducing our conflict. I was watching a video by Brandon Sanderson, and he was talking about adaptations, the difference between books and movies. And he was talking about the concept of a plot, and especially tension involving the plot. In movies, we want a slow build up all the way to the climax at the end. But in books, you have these build-ups, right? It builds up and then it releases. And then it builds up and then it releases. And I think that is so wise. So depending on what you're writing, you want to make sure that your plot is suitable for the medium that you're using. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But we want to develop a rising action that builds tension in the story, and then a climax that resolves the major conflict. And then we want a satisfying conclusion that ties up all the loose ends. So make sure you have a clear setup with your plot. Start, middle, end. Make sure your setup is good. Make sure the build-up is good. Make sure the tie-togethers are good. Okay, so next thing, engaging dialogue. I got to tell you guys, dialogue is so important. And I'm not trying to hammer on some really talented people, but when I go and I watch Attack of the Clones, and I love Star Wars, by the way, but some of the dialogue, y'all, dialogue plays a vital role in storytelling. We want to make dialogue that seems real. We want to make dialogue that draws us into the characters. We want to hear dialogue that advances the plot. We want dialogue that conveys emotion. It needs to feel natural while also keeping a sense of purpose so that the story can move forward. Somebody that I think does this really well is Stephen King. The man, when he writes dialogue, it draws you into a character. You immediately know who's talking, and it tells you something about that character. Also, it's not just wasted space. It moves the story forward. And so I'm still trying to learn how to grow in my ability to write good dialogue, but I think in some ways it comes from us listening to others, listening to how we talk, and then keeping a clear line of attack as far as progressing your plot forward. Another really important thing that kind of goes along with that is emotional resonance. Good storytelling engages with our emotions. We want to laugh, cry, feel suspense. We want to be happy when the good things happen to the characters. We want to connect the audience with the characters' dilemmas and joys. We want the audience to empathize and feel emotionally invested with the characters. I was watching a video talking about some different examples. The three examples were Up, Interstellar, and The Green Mile. And it was talking about how each one of these movies engages the audience's emotions in a different way. You think about Up in the first few minutes of the film, the montage through the years with nothing but music, and it draws you into the story. Or in Interstellar, when the main character is watching videos of his children growing up right before his eyes, and he's missed out on their childhood, on their lives. Or in The Green Mile, looking at a character who has done nothing wrong and is really gentle, and yet he's still on death row. Now, these are all really sad examples, but what ties them together is injustice. And you feel bad for the character because you want the character to have justice. You want them to have what they deserve. And this is conveyed through emotional performances. This is conveyed through cinematography. This is conveyed through music. And this can also be conveyed through words and dialogue. And this is something I think that you just kind of have to tweak and work out until you get the moments right. I'm not a master at this. I want to get better at this, but I feel like this is one of those things that it just takes time, experience, and reworking moments, getting peer review, getting feedback from other people so that you can get those moments just right. Okay, so another part of an engaging narrative is consequences. I gotta tell y'all, one of my pet peeves is when a character does not have to pay the price for something that they have done. Now, I understand if we're talking about a kid's show, the consequences are maybe less than if we're talking about an adult novel or film. It all depends on our target audience. But it's so important for characters to have consequences for their decision. Sometimes characters need to suffer. Characters need to go through hard things. And sometimes they have to pay the price for decisions that they've made. Another really important part of engaging storytelling is imagery. Painting vivid and sensory-rich imagery through descriptive language or through what you're showing on the screen. Engaging storytelling transports the audience into the world of the story. And this is supposed to stimulate the imagination. And so we don't want to make boring imagery, whether it's through our words or through what we're showing. We want it to be beautiful. We want it to be expansive. We want it to suck us into the world. And it's so important, especially when you're doing fantasy or sci-fi or things that don't exist inside of the normal world. It's so important to use vivid imagery. Another important part of storytelling is pacing and tension. I'll tell you what, especially when I'm watching a TV show and things are super intense for like episode upon episode, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a break in the storytelling. And so it's important for there to be times where the story is moving forward, where it's emotionally pushing forward, and then there's times where it needs to take a break. And so being sensitive to the pacing and the tension is super important. Because yes, we want to have conflict. Yes, we want all of that. But we want to make sure to take our time. We want to enjoy all of the steps through the journey. And the last thing I want to talk about today as far as engaging storytelling in this portion is themes and messages. Okay, so all stories explore universal themes, whether that's love or hope or pain or hurt. All of these stories explore these universal concepts. These themes provide depth to the stories and help it to resonate with people. And ultimately, this is going to make the story's broad significance so much more than it could be. Because how much better is it when it can connect to something that is going to make the audience's life better? Man, and I want to get better at all of these. I want to be able to tell stories that are amazing, that are engaging, that have captivating characters, that has a well-established plot where, you have twists and turns and you're trying to see where it's going. And I want to learn how to get better at that. And I'm sure you do too. And the only way that we get to do it is through doing it. Got to work out that muscle, y'all. So if you want to be better storytellers, you got to put in the reps. So if you haven't done it today, why don't you take 15 minutes and write? This is something I'm trying to get better at doing, is taking 15 minutes to work out my creative muscle. And you will get better at it, I promise. Okay, so I want to talk about exploring different storytelling mediums for just a few minutes, because I don't know if you guys realize this, but when you're writing a book versus a movie versus a TV show, it is going to be different. The priority in the story is different. Like Harry Potter, for example. The books span over 7 volumes, and each one gets to go in a lot of detail about the characters, about the history. I mean, it doesn't go super deep into all of that, but you have way more time in order to delve into the world. And not only that, but you get to also delve into characters' minds a lot more. Versus with film and TV, you don't get to do that as much because you're trying to tell a story through a visual medium. And so that being said, with film, there is not a lot of time. And so you have to really prioritize what you are going to tell as far as the story goes, the main thematic elements. And what's awesome about movies is you have the music, the sound effects, the visual representation, the special effects, and all of these together culminate in this amazing ride. And so when you look at like the Harry Potter movies, for example, they don't have a lot of the depth to the story that the books do, but they are amazing at telling the story that they are telling. They pull the major points of the book and try to bring that into a visual medium. And I think an even better example of this is the Lord of the Rings movies, for the most part. They do a really great job of taking the source material, which was extremely deep as far as world building and all of that stuff, and bringing that into a realm that makes more sense in film. The movies are extremely entertaining to watch, and you know what? It's a very different experience than reading the books, and there's a lot of story changes that happen between the books and the movie. Now, when we look at a TV show, we have more time to explore stuff than we do inside of a movie. And so this gives us an opportunity to really delve into characters, the story, the background, all of that stuff, but it's still a little more movie-like. I think of TV shows kind of as like a mix between like the storytelling that you would do in a book versus the storytelling that you would do in a movie. I love TV shows so much, especially anime. I love anime. One thing that I love about TV shows and anime is because you have more time, you get to go through more character growth a lot of times. You can pace the show a little bit slower and really get to go in depth with different milestones that the character gets to go through, and it makes it even more impactful once you get to the end of the story. Overall, these mediums offer unique opportunities for storytelling, showcasing the power of visuals, character development, and world building to engage and captivate audiences. Okay, so let's talk about world building for just a few minutes. I am not the best world builder in the world. I'm just not. I have friends that are amazing at world building, but it's not my favorite thing to do. I love stories. I love characters. I love storylines. That's what I like to do. But world building is super important because your character lives in this world. And so you want your character to not just be some alien that is transported into this dimension, unless that's the story that you're telling, which could be kind of cool. No, world building, you need to have your character live there. They need to be able to exist in this world. And so that means the world needs to be alive as well. The world building, and this is something I'm trying to learn, the world building needs to be there because the world is a character of itself. And that's something that I don't know if you guys ever have thought about before, but think of your world as a character in your story. Might just change how you go about with world building a little bit so that your character really resonates in the space. Some really great world builders. J.R.R. Tolkien. Need I say any more? The man literally wrote languages, literally wrote histories for his entire book series. And man, when you want to talk about amazing world building, that's your guy. See, with world building, it's a really fascinating thing because it enhances the overall experience of the story. It creates an immersive and believable world. You want to think about crafting the settings with their own histories and cultures and landscapes, and you can captivate readers and viewers this way. You can really give them an imaginative place to step into. So I'm actually in the middle of two projects that are, well, one of them is like a sci-fi futuristic thing, and the other one is kind of a futuristic thing as well. I don't know if I would call it sci-fi. And I've really learned that it's important not to just make the world generic. And by generic, I mean vague, without detail. It's really important to start to build aspects of the world that make it feel alive. Like I said, I have a friend that's amazing at world building, and he always is thinking about how this thing over here affects this thing over here, and this thing over here affects this thing over here, and really building a culture that is cohesive and seems real. And it goes so far into really engaging people in the storytelling. You know, I remember playing Final Fantasy X as a teenager, and man, I was just sucked into the world because it was so different. It was relatable in some ways, but it was also so different. And I loved it. I loved the style of costumes that the characters wore. I loved the sports and entertainment that they used in that world. I loved seeing the technology. I loved seeing all of the different lands and creatures and all of this stuff. And it really sets a backdrop for the story to take place in. And you need that backdrop. Overall, world building is a dynamic and iterative process that requires careful consideration and creativity. It adds depth and believability to storytelling, allowing readers and viewers to become fully immersed in the creative world and enhancing their overall experience. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is ending your stories. It's time to land that plane, y'all. It's so important to end your stories well because, man, there are so many times that I've watched the ending of something and it leaves me disappointed and it ruins the whole experience for the most part. For me, one of those movies was The Matrix 3. Oh, I just did not resonate with the ending. It felt very out of place to me with the rest of the story. Maybe you have a different perspective, but that's just me. So here's some tips that I learned online on how to end your stories well. Number one, keep it short. Don't do long, drawn out endings. Unfortunately, like in Lord of the Rings 3, The Return of the King, you don't want to have a 40-minute expansion of the story at the very end. It just makes it feel long and drawn out. People want to have climax, wrap up some stuff, and end. And so keeping it short is really important to keeping people on the line. Another tip, and and these aren't rules necessarily, but another tip is end with uncertainty. Have we ever watched Inception before? Seeing the little top spinning at the end and you're not sure if it's going to fall over or not. It's important sometimes to end with uncertainty because all of a sudden the movie ends or the story ends and it leaves your reader thinking because, oh no, what if it was this or what if it was that? Man, how many times have I watched a movie or read a book and I get to the end of it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what just happened. And all of a sudden it's the best book ever. Another important tip is closing up plot resolutions. So you've got all of these storylines, you've got all of these things happening, and then at the very end, everything comes together. You wrap up all the loose ends, right? Bringing all of this together is a really amazing way to create a climactic moment that creates a stronger end to wrap everything together. Another tip is crafting a character arc ending. Okay, so another example of this would be like Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring. At the end, you have this moment where Frodo and Sam are trying to escape, and Boromir had before that tried to take the ring from Frodo, and he feels like a load of garbage. But in the end, he ends up redeeming himself by sacrificing himself. And man, don't you lie to me. I know that you cried. I cried. This is an important character arc in his story where he gets turned from kind of a shady guy to being a hero. And man, what an amazing way to end a story. Because even though it's sad, you end on this high because he redeemed himself. And so ending a story with a character arc or some sort of character growth in this way can really be an amazing way to end a story as well. We want to make sure that we tell amazing endings with our stories because if we don't, it can leave a bad taste in the mouth of the audience. And so you want to make sure that when you're crafting your stories and you're ending them, put as much care into that as you did the rest of the story. A great thing to do is when you're writing the story to keep the end in mind. I've heard many authors and writers say that before they even start writing their whole story, they know how it starts and they know how it ends. How they get to there and the in-between, that may change around a little bit. But know how your ending is going to go and make it an awesome ending. And yeah, if you need to adjust things, don't feel like you have to be locked into any certain thing. But we want to tell amazing endings. And so, guys, that's my episode today. Thank you for joining me on the Reimagine Entertainment podcast. I want to continue to grow as a storyteller, and I hope you do too. And so, guys, if this was helpful to you, I just want to encourage you to join me on my journey as I'm working on building an entertainment studio that focuses in on music, TV, film, storytelling, and I hope that we can grow together. Keep creating, guys.